What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Charter Podcast, brought to you by St. Xavier University. My name is Ruthie Polinsky, and I am joined by Alex Shapiro, as always. Alex, great to see you. Also, so excited to welcome in Matthew Coller, who covers the Vikings for Purple Insider. We're going to preview this matchup. Matthew, thank you so much for being here. This is going to be an interesting one, and we're so grateful to have you here to kind of break it all down from the Vikings perspective with us.
Oh, it's always interesting when it's Vikings and Bears. I mean, if you go through the history of this one, this is the week where over here in Minnesota, Vikings fans get very nervous because through the years, we have seen the craziest things. One time the Bears beat the Vikings. Well, I think it was Rex Grossman threw for 34 yards in a game. Chad Hutchinson beat the Vikings once upon a time in one of his only career wins. There was a game in 2019 that I covered where the Vikings played so badly that Stephon Diggs didn't show up to practice the next week. And then the whole trade demand kind of started there and everything. A lot of things tend to happen to the Vikings in Chicago. So I'll be interested to find out what we get this time.
I have kind of like an overarching question just about these two teams parallel, looking at them preseason. Right. I think they both went in very opposite directions based off of preseason expectations. Right. I don't think, especially when you heard that JJ McCarthy was going to be out for the year, I think you kind of expected the Vikings to kind of maybe hang around. But I think most people were picking them to finish last in the division. And now here they are, a very quiet 8-2 team. And you have the Chicago Bears, who had all of these expectations with Caleb Williams and the pieces that they put around him. And here they are, really kind of struggling to pick the pieces up and put the season together. What's kind of been the dialogue this week as you get ready for this matchup against a Bears team that is sort of in shambles right now?
Yeah, the expectation thing is really interesting because I think a lot of NFL coaches, even though they know what people are saying on the outside, they pretend that they don't. We don't hear the outside noise. Not here, okay? But Kevin O'Connell has actually taken the opposite approach from the very beginning. He went to his team and said he knew the Vegas line, he knew the projections, and said, this is BS. Like, this is not what we're going to be. And he has used that all season long, especially early on when they started winning games, to build his own credibility with this group in this locker room, to be able to come back and say, I told you so. I told you we were better than this 6.5 win total. And truthfully, I always thought that was a bit of a weird number for this team, because I know that, like, Sam Darnold, and if you look at Sam Darnold's history before he got here, then you probably wouldn't have picked them to be a playoff team. But at the same time, what Brian Flores did last year with much less talent than he has this year, he still had a top half of the league defense. And then they added 4 really good veteran proven players to the defense. And with Sam Darnold, I think we all understood that if he can just keep the car on the road, number 18 is over there. TJ Hawkinson's coming back eventually. Jordan Addison is a first-round draft pick. They brought in Aaron Jones. They have not a perfect offensive line, but the best pass-blocking unit that they've had in a very long time. And Kevin O'Connell is really good at getting wide receivers open. If Nick Mullins and Josh Dobbs could keep them in games last year, and in some instances win games, then why wouldn't Sam Darnold be able to do this? I guess that was my thinking. Josh Dobbs, I don't think he's the backup in San Francisco. Brock Purdy's hurt, and Brandon Allen is going to play. And that's what Kevin O'Connell was winning some games with last year. They almost beat the Lions last year, twice with Nick Mullins. So if you can do that, then you should be able to take a much more talented quarterback who's flawed and put him into the same situation. Now, I didn't think 8-2. I thought they would be much more of a 500 type of team. As far as Chicago goes, that's one also where I was a little confused at the high expectations, because history just points to rookie quarterbacks having a tough time. There's a CJ Stroud every once in a while. Jaden Daniels is as old as us, so that's a little bit different too, with the extra years of college that he got to play. Same with Bo Nix. But, I mean, to ask a young quarterback coming out to handle the expectations of playing in Chicago in the toughest division in the league, I thought asking that team to be in the playoffs is probably too much. So I'm not shocked at where they are. And the other thing is too, the Bears have I know that the world is burning there. I know how it is there, but They have a positive point differential and are 2 silly plays away from having a winning record, which I think would have shifted the narrative a lot if the Hail Mary never happens there. So I still think if you're the Vikings, you can't look at this like 8-2, 4-6. You have to look at it much more. They're probably closer than it appears.
Love that. Unbelievable breakdown. So thanks, Matthew. I want to dial in on Sam Darnold a little bit, because here's a guy who came out and was on fire, right? And was kind of taking the league by storm. Don't hear so much about Sam Darnold anymore, maybe petering out a little bit. Can you just take us through the Sam Darnold experience over the course of the season up to now?
Sure. I think at first, maybe opposing teams didn't really know what to expect from Sam Darnold. And matchup wise, I think they landed some very favorable matchups for how Kevin O'Connell wants to play. San Francisco, he played that defense I don't know how many times when he was out with the Los Angeles Rams, and he beat them last year too with Kirk Cousins in kind of a season-saving national TV game. He just seems to have a really good sense for how their defense works and took advantage of it. They just confused the heck out of a young CJ Stroud in that game and had every opportunity there with the football. They were causing turnovers and sacks and all sorts of things, and there was a lot of very favorable situations where if you can run or pass, then you can run play actions with Sam Darnold. And Aaron Jones got off to a hot start in his first 5 games, was averaging 5.5 yards a carry, and he was playing off of that. And they also had, I think, a top 3 left tackle in football in Christian Darrisaw, playing the best football that I had seen him play. And as they got into the meat of the schedule, you start to run into adversity, as they'll always tell you. But they played a really close game with Detroit. They lost by 2 points, which looks like a really good loss at this point. And then 3 days later, they have to fly out to LA, play Matthew Stafford with Puka Nacua coming back, where they're a very different team there. And they just seemed gassed. They had to go to London before that and beat the New York Jets in a kind of a knockdown, drag-out game with a very physical team, and they ran out of gas a little bit there. So they lost those 2 games in a row, and then it was natural to start to ask, okay, is this team really kind of, I don't want to say fraud, but maybe not as good as they looked at the beginning of the season when they had the games at US Bank Stadium against opponents that they understood their defenses. And there was an opportunity to just blow the doors off of all those AFC South teams and be like, hey, we're back, everybody. We're good here. And they didn't really do that. They handily beat them. They had twice as many yards as their opponents, 3 times as many first downs as their opponents over the last 3 weeks. But they beat Flacco by 10. They beat Mac Jones by 5. And then the Lions blow them out by 57 the next week. And then even against the Titans, it's a 10-point win, which no one's going to complain about, but it wasn't exactly a smooth ride there. And so I could see where you would start saying, well, all right, is this just going to be kind of mid, or like, what's the deal here? But as far as the way Sam Darnold has performed in recent weeks, it's funny because his PFF grade, if you go by a metric like that, is the same over the last 5 weeks as it was the first 5 weeks. It's that the circumstances have been different. They lost Christian Darrisaw. He's out for the year. That is an enormous, enormous loss. Cam Robinson cannot make up for what Christian Darrisaw was doing. The running game has essentially disappeared, and Darnold has made some of those classic Darnold mistakes, but 3 of them came in one game, which of course got a lot of attention. If he had spread those out a little bit more, probably wouldn't have. So I think it's almost felt like the preseason for these last 3 weeks, and now we're getting back into real games that matter against the Chicago Bears. And I still think that us, them, everyone doesn't really know with Sam Darnold. He's had a terrific season. He's 8-2. He's top 10 in quarterback rating, top 12 in PFF grade. You couldn't ask for anything more there. And he was great against the Titans. But now the real test begins. It's Chicago, Arizona, Atlanta. They go out to Seattle. Then they play 2 more division games. We will really find out what this team is made of over the next stretch.
Unbelievable. Just kind of summary and just hearing it from your perspective, because I think everyone else in the division is sort of waiting for the Sam Darnold fall off, right? And it's just not really coming. And so I think it speaks a lot to, sort of the resurgence and what a coaching staff can do for a quarterback. And we'll get into that, I know, in a little bit too. But I think also you can't take away maybe some of Sam's success is that his defense is keeping him in games. And like this Brian Flores defense, Matthew, little inside fun fact about me, any chance that I get to talk about Brian Flores, I will jump on it because I covered him in New England when he won the Super Bowl as the de facto defensive coordinator. Then I followed him to Miami, covered him for 2 seasons when he was the head coach there. And I have a lot to say about sort of the national narrative that has been sparked by the quarterback in Miami, but I just feel like Brian's never come out and told his side of the story yet. And so I think there's a lot there, and I'm a big cheerleader for Brian Flores because I think he's a fantastic football coach in general. And I think he deserves to have looks as a head coach moving forward. This is a guy that brought back-to-back winning seasons to the Dolphins for the first time in 20 years. And, everyone wants to say that he's a terrible person and a terrible coach. And all you got to do is look at what he did there in Miami with a lot of times not a ton of talent. So anyways, all of that to say, Brian Flores, right? I mean, this is a guy, I want to get your perspective on kind of just getting to know him and cover him as a defensive coordinator and sort of what he's brought to the defensive side of the ball there.
Well, first of all, I would not describe him as a terrible person. And I don't think that anybody in the Minnesota Vikings organization would either. I do think that he is cut from a different cloth than a lot of the coaches that I'm sure Tua had ever had before. And some of those players who are always the best of the best, when they get coached hard, and sometimes too hard, I'm sure Brian Flores would say that. And when we asked him about Tua's comments, he did say that there were some things he would like to have back as it pertains to that. And I'm sure that when you coach a quarterback who's young and inexperienced, the same way that you coach your veteran defensive players, it's a little different. So there's definitely 2 sides to that story. But my experience with Brian Flores is that he has galvanized these players in a way that I think you rarely see. And what I mean is that he's made it their defense. It's not, when everyone says Brian Flores' scheme, it's really all the players' scheme as well, because they have so many high intelligent and intense players that their meeting rooms are group chats. They're not just Flores teaching on a whiteboard, you do this, you do this. He's having consistent dialogue with these players, with Stephon Gilmore, who played with him in New England, with Harrison Smith, who's one of the most brilliant players of the last 20 years in the NFL. And then I think the real linchpin to this whole thing has been Blake Cashman, who they brought in from Houston. Not somebody that a lot of people knew, but he is really the head of the snake of this defense. He's the defensive play caller, but he also has the freedom to do almost whatever he wants. He gets the play call, but every play call has a bunch of options off of that play call. Kind of reminds me of how Peyton Manning would go to the line of scrimmage with a certain play in mind, but then would just adjust all the routes when he was up there. Blake Cashman really does the same thing with this defense. And that comes from Brian Flores teaching him how to do it and giving him the freedom to be able to do that. So the players feel like they have ownership of this entire defense, where he's talking to the defensive linemen. Hey, if I have you line up over this technique, like, what do you think is going to happen if we rush over that? And it's more of a discussion, a group discussion, as they form a weekly game plan. So it's not, here's how we line up, here's how we play, here's how you blitz. It's each week, it's kind of an amoeba. It's something different, and you can't really put a finger on it. And even when you watch it back on the tape, you're like, oh, okay, I've never seen him do that coverage before. I've never seen him run that player from there before. And what you've seen from young quarterbacks, I'm sure Caleb Williams has spent the week with his head spinning, is they don't know how to deal with it. Now, Jared Goff and Matthew Stafford, those guys have been to Super Bowls, and also Goff has a great offensive line. That helped a lot when those 2 quarterbacks played against them. But those are the only 2 quarterbacks who have looked like they've had a clue against what Brian Flores is doing. And I think it will be a rough ride for any young quarterback, but especially someone like Caleb Williams, who just changed play callers as well.
7-1 against rookie quarterbacks, Brian Flores. I mean, come on. Yeah. It's crazy.
Anyways, we've talked about it all week. Is this is going to be Caleb Williams, his most difficult test by far. So I'm sure Brian Flores has some crazy stuff cooked up for him. I want to ask you about another specific guy on the defense, and it's a guy that Brian Flores brought over from Miami, Andrew Van Ginkel. Andrew Van Ginkel, some numbers: 8 sacks and 2 pick sixes. He's a dude who is rushing the passer from outside linebacker, and he's also playing a lot of pass coverage from outside linebacker and maybe a little inside linebacker. I'm just curious, what are you seeing that makes him able to do both things at such a high level, play coverage and play pass rush? And then what is that doing for the whole defense?
Yeah, he leads the league in coverage snaps by 50 over the next most used linebacker coverage. It's actually interesting. About 10 years ago, there were some of these guys like Justin Houston. Kansas City would use a 3-4 and drop back Tamba Hali and things like that. But we haven't seen that in a while. So Van Ginkel is a bit of a throwback there. And then even more of a throwback to some of the Steelers days of Jason Gilden and players like that in more true 3-4-ish fashion. But no one really plays 3-4 anymore. It's, as I said, like it's a moving target. It's not specific. But the thing about Flores that I think really stands out to me is that he started in New England as a scout. And so he always thinks through this skill set sort of mindset of how can I use this player's skills? They have a big thing in New England during that Patriot Way era, which was tell me what they can do, not what they can't do. And for Andrew Van Ginkel, the fact that he can do a lot of different things, the fact that he is effective rushing one-on-one versus tackles, but he can also guard a tight end in space, that makes him super unique. But also what Brian Flores sees, his wheels start ticking. How can I use all of these skills at once? And the result is that you never know what he's going to be doing or where he's going to be doing it from. They will line him up so wide outside that on the all-22 film, you can't see him from the end zone view. And then he just comes flying in. You're like, oh, I guess Van Ginkel was in on this play because he was lined up so wide outside. But then on other plays, he might be right over the tackle or he might be on inside linebacker. And they do a lot of pressures where Van Ginkel will start to rush and you'll see the linemen, all right, they turn toward him and then he disappears. And they're like, where'd he go? And then someone else has a one-on-one matchup and they're rushing the passer one-on-one and winning. And one guard is standing there going, wait, I swear I had a guy. I thought it was that Van Ginkel guy. Where did he go? And he's back there in coverage somewhere. And I think that that's really the key here is that there's no identifying pre-snap what he's going to be doing and where he's going to be going. You wouldn't be able to do that. And that's why a lot of coaches always say the X's and O's and Jimmy's and Joe's thing, but you wouldn't be able to do that with just anybody. The guy has to be able to cover. And most of the time when teams try to use a defensive lineman or outside linebacker in coverage, that eventually gets exposed. It's a cheat code to have a guy that doesn't.
This is kind of an overarching question. We touched on it earlier, but Kevin O'Connell, coach of the year?
I mean, right now, I'd have to go through everybody else. So Dan Campbell certainly is deserving. His team is crushing everybody. We usually do kind of do that coach of the year by who exceeded expectations by the most. But with Kevin O'Connell, I think it starts with his attitude, his disposition, that permeates every part of the team, including Brian Flores, who I think has learned a lot about managing players from Kevin O'Connell. It's this undying positivity that sometimes can get annoying as a reporter because you're like, okay, Kevin, I know, but some things went wrong with this guy. And it's not that he doesn't realize that or he made a change at right guard. So if they need to make a change, he will do it. And I think he does coach them hard when they need to be coached hard. But the authentic belief in his players, including Sam Darnold, you just see it in them, right? And I think when someone conveys that so well, I did a story with Kevin about his post-game speeches and how much they mean to players. And what the players told me was, it's great that the world gets a window into Kevin O'Connell because that's how he coaches us all the time. It's always like those post-game speeches for his belief. I think it starts there because we talk about culture all the time, but it's just this sort of broad word that my brain shuts down when people say it. But when you can connect as a head coach with hundreds of people somehow and manage all of that and understand what everybody needs at a given time, and be responsible for the renaissance of a quarterback who had struggled and sputtered through his entire career. I don't know where the hours in the day come from to be able to do this. I mean, he's talking to practice squad defensive players who are on the scout team about, hey, what do those routes look like to you? Give me your feedback. He makes everybody feel like they're involved in this thing and not I'm the employer, you're the employees, which I think is one thing players don't like. And his experience as a player is just invaluable in this because he understands their perspective. And it all starts there. It also starts with the man can draw up some route combinations. He could get receivers open. The fact that Justin Jefferson is still at the top of the league in receiving yards with the way that opposing teams play him, which is all attention all the time on Justin Jefferson, it really speaks to Kevin O'Connell's ability to draw up the X's and O's as well. So he brings both sides of that. A lot of times it's, well, are you like a culture guy or you like a scheme guy? And I think he, being from that McVay tree, that's the reason why Sean McVay would have wanted him as the offensive coordinator, because it's a very, very similar type of approach from what you see from Sean McVay.
Matthew, thank you so much. Before we get out of here, can you share with us your prediction for the game? I know you said it's always crazy when the Vikings come to Chicago, but can we get a prediction from you?
30-12, all field goals, though. Just all. No, I'm just
no, kidding. Stop it.
That's a 10 field. That's a lot of field goals.
Yeah, 10-4 in field goal. No, it's just never easy there, and it's not going to be nice. I'm already wearing my hoodie in preparation to walk to Soldier Field for my hotel. I think I'll go with like 23-17 Vikings. Eberflus's defense is pretty good and has given O'Connell some problems, probably more than any other coach has versus Kevin O'Connell over the last couple of years. So I do think this is going to be close, and I think the Vikings should be way more concerned about the Bears than maybe they were about the Titans or about the Jaguars. They have to play better than they did the last couple of weeks in order to win this one.
They got to get a pass rush too. It's been absolutely non-existent the last couple of weeks, and we're all kind of waiting for that to take off here. But Matthew Coller, great stuff. Oh my gosh, cannot thank you enough. That was awesome. Just hearing your insight and just a lot of fun chatting with you. It'll be a great one this Sunday.
Sure will. Thanks so much for having me, guys.
Awesome stuff from Matthew Coller, purpleinsider.com. Make sure you check him out. That was awesome. Like, we've been studying this matchup all week, Alex, and I feel like I just learned so much. You just get such great perspective from people who are in that building, around those coaches, around the players. Like, I'm scared of the Vikings. Like, I was scared, but now I'm like real scared.
Yeah, exactly. It's like we knew Brian Flores was going to be a huge challenge, but then when you hear him talking about all the different types of like fake pass rushes and the disguises, and it's impossible to identify what's going on pre-snap. It's like, it could be like 9 sacks.
And even just listening to him talk about Kevin O'Connell, I think right now there's such a huge discourse in Chicago about what is a head coach? What do you want from a head coach? Like, what is his personality, and how does the team take on the coach's personality? Not only has the defense taken on Brian Flores' personality, as Thomas Brown said, which I thought was so eloquent yesterday, but I also am just like really, it's so interesting to have that dynamic between, Brian Flores, who's this hard-nosed kind of, tough, sort of has the reputation of being like a mean football coach. Obviously, he's not a mean person, but he's just kind of one of those coaches that really holds people accountable. To have that parallel with Kevin O'Connell, who's this ultra positive, charismatic, just nice guy, it's just such an interesting sort of formula, and it's working there. And, I think a lot of people in Chicago are probably pretty jealous of that.
Yeah. I mean, especially like, we didn't even really get into it, but this is also a team that got rid of their top pass rusher and Daniil Hunter and just didn't miss a beat. And obviously, yeah, I think the coaching staff, we talked about it at length, deserves a ton of credit for what they have put together and how they have just been able to find the special sauce from their guys, putting their guys in a position to succeed so they can just play fast, play the game up to the best of their abilities. And they certainly are.
All right, let's do a little game pick here. Alex, you go first.
I kind of loved Matthew's all field goals scenario, but I won't go there. I'm still on like, I can't pick the Bears until they show me that they deserve to be picked for a win, So I'm going to go Vikings 27-17.
Yeah. 27-17. Sounds pretty reasonable. I still don't see the Bears giving up 27 points. Like, that's kind of where I'm struggling with what's going on right now, because I'm like, the offense is putting the pieces together. The defense certainly has its holes, but I still don't see them giving up that many points. They've just done a really nice job.
Have to? We just got done talking about Andrew Van Ginkel, 2 pick sixes already. This team, the Vikings, take the ball away at such a high clip. They have so many interceptions.
Yeah.
Maybe a little pick sixy.
All right. Well, I do see something like that happening on either side of this matchup. Sure. I think you can get Sam Darnold to give you the ball. So I'm going, this hurts me, but this 5-17 record in 1-score games is just eating away at me right now for the Bears. So I see this going to 5-18 in 1-score games. I think it's going to be close. I see this almost as like a 23-20. I think that's what I'm going to go with. I'm making my pick on the Big Pro Football Show later today. That's what I'm going to go with, 23-20. I think the Bears score one more point than they scored last week, which will be a positive, and that's progress, right? I think they get in the end zone. I do think they'll be able to move the ball. I think Caleb Williams has a lot of confidence coming into this game, and I think Thomas Brown instills that in them. So yes, this is a very, very talented defense that they're going up against. But I could also see this being really ugly, like 17-12. If the Bears somehow win, I think it's going to have to be like that. You know what I mean? Like, it's just going to be ugly. So I'm going with 23-20. I don't feel great about it. I'm like you. I can't pick the Bears until they give me a reason to pick them. But this is a scary little stretch here, because if they don't win this weekend, Alex, then they go into short week against the Lions, and they're looking at a 6-game losing streak, and it's unraveling. I mean, it's sort of already unraveled, but it really could get ugly here. So it's got to be, if this is a win for the Chicago Bears, I think it could really change how you look at the rest of the season. At the same time, I don't have any confidence in picking that team right now.
We shall see. We shall see next week. Are we talking about, is the arrow pointing up in the win column in addition to them scoring one more point than they did last week per Ruthie's projection? Or is the conversation going to be, how, when, and where does this thing actually bottom out? Because every week it's like, have they hit rock bottom? They could be continuing to bottom out. We don't know. So we'll see, Ruthie. It'll be, as Matthew said, it'll be an intriguing game for sure.
You definitely need DeAndre Swift to be healthy. We'll get a final injury report later today. And Tevin Jenkins seemingly coming back. That's good news. Montez Sweat not on the injury report this week. That's good news. If he's totally healthy coming into this game, you want to see him pop, because he is effing frustrated, as he said yesterday. So, yeah, great stuff, Alex Shapiro. Love you to death,
Ruthie.
Yep, love you to death. And let's see how this one shakes out. Thank you so much for listening to the Charter Podcast, brought to you by St. Xavier University. I'm Ruthie Polinsky, Alex Shapiro. Enjoy the game, everyone.